Hi, I'm Pawn, a 26-year-old late diagnosed autistic human being. I live in the UK. I'm from France originally, and I make videos about autism. Today, I initially wanted to film a video about special interests, but then I watched the video that Dana Anderson uploaded yesterday, I think, about trauma, childhood trauma as an autistic person. I'll put all the relevant links if you want to check it out. And I thought I'd film a video about the same thing, like kind of like my own experience. Now that it's like I've just watched the video, it's fresh in my mind, and give my own experience with childhood trauma as an autistic person, because it has been very prevalent in my life, and I think it's a very important topic to talk about because it's really tough to experience any kind of abuse in general, but especially experiencing child abuse as an autistic person. I might feel bad for the rest of the day, but I think it's important to talk about. So I've mentioned in previous videos that I come from a pretty abusive family, but it's not necessarily a kind of abuse that was a neglect that was the kind that is obvious, that you see, because then someone would have probably done something about it. But essentially, my mother, I suspect, has narcissistic personality disorder. She's undiagnosed, but she fits the criteria like a glove. And my dad, I suspect, is also autistic like me, undiagnosed, but he is also pretty narcissistic, unfortunately, because as we all know, autistic people can be bad people as well. Like, autistic doesn't necessarily mean all good and pure and beautiful and innocent. Autistic people are people, and we have good sides to us, we have bad sides to us. They had me when my mom was 40 years old and my father was 54. I've always been told I was wanted. I believe I was. I just think I wasn't wanted for the right reasons. I think, well, no, I don't think, I know that my parents are very selfish. They have expressed things in the past that made it seem like they thought, in their own narcissistic brains, they thought that a child would be a good idea because then I would be able to look after them when they get old, things like that. Jokes on them, right? My dad is a pretty violent person in every sense of the word. He has like two sides to him. He has a kind of a persona that looks really tender and sweet and kind, and then he has a high side to him that is very scary and aggressive, evil, honestly. From a material point of view, I had a very happy childhood. I had always plenty of food to eat, a roof over my head. Not only a roof, but like it wasn't a crappy apartment in the city. We had like a big house in the countryside. We had dogs and cats and horses, and I was always playing outside. I always had clothes to wear. Materially speaking, great childhood. I got plenty of gifts at Christmas, birthdays. I was spoiled. I had a bed full to the brim with plushies. On the outside, they looked like amazing parents. And they had a reputation, especially my mom. She had this great persona at school and outside of the home. Like she was, very outgoing, very extroverted, very, very strong personality, very opinionated and a very unique style. And people either hated her or they admired her. My whole childhood I heard, "You're so lucky to have your mom. I wish my mom was like that, blah, blah, blah." And I was always like, you haven't seen what she's like at home. At home, she was like a completely different person. She was bitter, angry, and frustrated and impatient. It was all about what she looked like to the outside, what people thought of her. On an emotional level, there was nothing going on. I was completely neglected. It was never important what I felt, and I had no room to express myself. It was all about her needs, her wants, and I had to follow along. And she expressed to me on multiple occasions how disappointed she was that I wasn't the perfect little girl that she wanted me to be. The fact that I didn't like shopping, I didn't like fashion, I didn't like girly things. Basically, I was a complete geek, still am, nerd, whatever you want to call it. Like, she kind of was a geek and a nerd as well, because one of the things that we have in common is like we like things like Harry Potter. I mean, she was the one who made me discover these kinds of things, so she's part of the reasons why I have the special interest that I have. But also she's very into fashion, she's very into girly things, and I never was. They would call me a tomboy when I was a kid, and so she never missed an opportunity to tell me how disappointed she was that I wasn't the girl that she had dreamt of, that she could go shopping with, blah blah blah. Even like in front of other people she would say that, like she was hoping that they would feel pity for her or something. Like we would go to the shops, she knew that I didn't like it, she would force me to look at clothes and try them on, and then she'd look at the sellers and be like, oh, if only I had a girl who liked shopping and who had, I'm very girly, I wish she was too. And I felt so fucking embarrassed, humiliated. She often humiliated me, and so my emotional needs were never met. And then my dad, on the other hand, is still emotionally and physically abusive. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about that, but basically whenever he has like anger control issues, and he has outbursts of anger. And when I was little, he actually hurt my mom. She had to get stitches. She almost went to the police, and then he was like, oh no, I promise I won't do it again. So they stayed together, and then I came along. And when I was 4, 6 years old, my first memories of violence go back to when I was about 6. And so he started to be physically violent with me, and my mom turned a blind eye because I think she thought, as long as it's not me, it's fine. Coming from my own mother is absolutely horrible. Like, if I imagined having a kid and being like, oh, I don't care, as long as it's my kid getting hit, not me, I'm good, I don't care. Worst part about the violence that I endured was that it was not something that you could see. I think my dad was very careful to, and that just shows how insidious the abuse was. He would like hurt me in ways that wouldn't leave marks or traces. So he would like grab my ear and suspend me, so I would be like falling on the floor. He would like be holding me up by the ear, and obviously it would hurt a lot. Sometimes he would like kick me with his foot, but sometimes he would like grab my arm and squeeze it really really tight. But it wasn't anything that would have, it wasn't like I had big bruises all over my face, that would have been too obvious. He wasn't much of a puncher or hitter. It was more like insidious. I would also run into my room, and he would come after me, and I would try to hide in my bedroom, and I could hear him coming. I did not have a lock on my bedroom door or anything like that. My parents could come and go as they wanted, and so he would always end up finding me, and I felt such sheer terror, at the thought of like I'm a child, I'm not physically strong, my father is an adult male, he's very strong, I'm at his mercy, he can do anything he wants with me, and no one is gonna help me. I don't know what's gonna happen to me. Where I think the autism comes in is that's something I read somewhere about how autistic children tend to, when they're the victims of abuse, they tend not to think of telling anyone, and that was exactly my situation. And I actually mentioned it to my psychiatrist during my autism diagnosis. I was like, I was abused at home, and it never occurred to me to tell anyone. Like, never. It wasn't a possibility. And I think that's because first I thought my parents were right and I was in the wrong, and so I was a bad child, you know, even though deep down I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I was like, I guess I deserved it. And on the other hand, I thought it was normal. I thought every family was like that. I thought there was nothing unusual or different about my family situation, so obviously I didn't think to tell anyone. I would basically, my whole childhood, I would go about my day daydreaming about fantasy worlds. I'll talk about that more when I talk about my special interests, but that was my lifeline. Basically, I would go around, go about my day, basically living in a different world in my head to escape reality. That's how I survived all these years. Because I think otherwise I would have taken my own life. It wasn't all bad. It never is all bad, right? Like, I had good moments, things I shared with my dad. My dad is really into animals, especially horses. So we would spend a lot of time with the horses. My mom is really into films, and so we would watch a lot of films together, so we had things that we connected on. But I very much had a sort of, and still have a sort of, Stockholm syndrome, where I still feel attached to my abusers. Well, it's a lot better now than it was a few years ago, but there were points where I was like, I don't know who I am anymore without my parents in my life. Like, I'm nothing without them, things like that. Feeling like sheer distress, because on the one hand, I knew that spending time with them hurt me a lot, but on the other hand, I couldn't live without them, so it was really tough. But basically, as a child, I was very compliant, very obedient. Little children are easy to manipulate. Narcissists love children and animals because they can do whatever they want with them. Also, it's worth mentioning that my parents also abused our pets, which is something I really struggle to live with to this day, because at the time I didn't see any of it. And now, with hindsight, I realize all the ways in which they were abusive to our dogs, basically every animal that we had. My dad hit them and kicked them. They were heavily matted because my mom has such a narcissistic personality. She only got like purebred dogs that were pretty rare and impressive, because it's all about how you look. So they would get big breeds of dogs that had really long hair, and then they would never take them to the groomers. They would get really matted, and they would have skin problems, and they would stink. One of them was my childhood dog, my best friend for many years. He wasn't one that my parents bought from a breeder. He was the only dog that we had that was a crossbreed. So it was actually a puppy that we got from one of my nannies, and he was a poodle mix. He was a mix of different breeds, and he had long curly hair. At the end of his life, by the end of his life, he was in such a horrible state. And not only that, but when I tried to speak about it with my parents, they blamed me for it, saying it was my dog, it was my responsibility, and I had abandoned him by moving out of the house. Things like that. That's the kind of thing that they said, Basically, a lot of guilt tripping, a lot of manipulation, a lot of gaslighting. Basically, anything they can do to maintain their beautiful image as the perfect parents with a horrible daughter. I'm ungrateful. I cost them too much money, even though they never helped me financially, and instead relied completely on my partner, so that he would provide for me. Like, they will say the most horrible things about me behind my back to other people, to even they told stuff like that to my partner, you know, lying about me. They told stuff like that to my in-laws, and my in-laws were actually shocked, and they came to me because they knew me well, and they were like, I can't believe what your parents just told us about you. And they told me, and it was like a huge punch in the face for me, because maybe because of my autism, maybe I was too naive, you know, but like I never thought that they would say stuff like that about me behind my back to make themselves look good. Basically, they were horrible parents. I didn't realize it, and I think that's where the autism comes in. I didn't realize it until I met my partner when I was 18. So we met online. He lived in Switzerland, I lived in France, and we would see each other every weekend. I would either go to his home or he would travel to mine, and I started taking some distance from my parents, and then we moved together in London about a year and a half, 2 years after we met. And so I started spending less and less time with my parents, right? And that's when I realized, I slowly started realizing that the way I had been treated by my own family wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy. I remember one day, it was during our first year of living in the UK, so it must have been in 2017, 2018. I called my partner while he was at work, because at the time he still worked in an office. I called him and I was like crying, and I told him I think my dad used to hit me, and I was like having a meltdown basically. You know, the weird part about it is I never forgot. It's not like the memory came back to me. I never forgot about any of the abuse. It just didn't click. I just thought it was normal. So that was the start of a long process of unpacking and healing my trauma. And I remember once I would call my parents basically every day at first when I moved out. I felt so attached to them, like I was part of them. I had to tell them about everything that was going on in my life. I would often visit them, and once I visited them for a month, I remember thinking, it's not normal the way I'm feeling right now. I shouldn't be feeling that way. And I went online and I typed like, is it normal to have panic attacks when you visit your parents? And then I fell down a rabbit hole of narcissistic parents, childhood abuse, blah blah blah. I bought and read, while I was at my parents' house, I read the book by Susan Forward. I can't remember what it's called, but I'll put it somewhere. I read that book. I started therapy through BetterHelp about it, and I slowly started processing my trauma, and I confronted my parents on several occasions, and that basically gave them lots of opportunities to hurt me further by denying the abuse, or basically saying I was responsible for my own abuse, which is the worst thing you can tell someone, and that there was basically something wrong with me, that my brain was broken, that blah blah blah, you know, like they are perfect and I'm the problem, essentially. I went through the same cycle several times over the last few years. I went through, you know, like completely hating them, not wanting anything to do with them, not talking to them for over a year, to then talking to them again and getting tricked into thinking that maybe they had changed, and then getting hurt a lot and realizing that no, actually they haven't changed and probably won't, and then going away again and hating them and not talking to them, and then going, and I went through that several times at the expense of my health, my partner's health. Thankfully, I came to a point where, I want to say in the last couple years, where I realized, last time I visited my parents was in the summer of 2022, I believe. I was very violently attacked by my dad, verbally, not physically. He basically very violently attacked me because he has kind of a delayed processing that I think might come from his autism, where he was like, so I told him, you know, you hurt me when I was a child. here's all the ways you hurt me. And I was obviously hoping for him to go, I realize now that I hurt you, I'm sorry, I'll try to make it better. But no, like, he will hear you out, not say anything, and then come back several days later, and he will have prepared a whole speech that he puts into your face that is so violent about all the reasons why you're a messed up person and he's perfect, basically, because he can't stand the idea of being blamed with anything. So that's what happened that summer, and I was like, this is it, this is it. And then my mother kind of played a bit of a role, a performance. She pretended to be like the poor abused wife, and she tricked us into thinking that she was gonna divorce my dad, and like she didn't care about how I was feeling. Again, like, she found a way to make it all about her again. And she was basically like, oh yeah, I mean, I realized that he hurts me so much, and I'm gonna divorce him, and so the attention was all on her. Then I realized a few months later it was all a fraud, you know, like, she wasn't really thinking that. It was another way to be the victim and put all the attention on her. She was lying, and she wasn't going to divorce my dad or anything like that. And so after that, unfortunately, she visited her because this trip had already been booked. Even though I didn't want her to come anymore, it was difficult to say you can't, you know, once, you know, it was all booked. So she visited here, and I had a horrible time. And then I was like, I'm done, like, this is it, I'm not seeing my parents again. And then unfortunately, a few months later, so in December of 2022, my great aunt got really sick, and she passed away in January 2023. So I visited her in the hospital a few days before she passed away, and you know, I did my best to protect myself from my parents. They still got to me somehow. They always find a way. You know, my mom tried to convince me that what was happening to my great aunt was all my fault because I said I wasn't visiting for Christmas, and so supposedly that was such an emotional shock for my great aunt that she got sick, which not only was it not true because she had like actual medical stuff going on, but also what a horrible thing to say to your daughter. Like, see this family member that you care a lot about and you love very dearly, wow, they're gonna die because of you, and you'll have that on your conscience for the rest of your life. Like, I have no words to express how horrible of a thing it is to say to someone, let alone your own daughter. There were so many things that they did or said during that time, those few days that I visited my great aunt in the hospital. They were so proactive in trying to hurt me that I could just talk about it for an hour. Just that, just those few days. Then I was like, I'm done, like, for good. And I haven't seen them since. So I haven't seen them in over a year. I kind of still talk to them through messages. My dad will send me some emails from time to time, and my mom will send me WhatsApp messages. She has tried to get me back under her control, but I think they can tell that I'm slowly slipping away. So I'm a lot better now. I struggle a lot less than I did a few years back. I think had I not been autistic, I would have realized a lot sooner what was going on. Maybe I would have asked for help. When I was a teenager, I would get to school almost every day crying because of arguments that I'd had in the car with my dad. And when I say arguments, it's not just a regular teenage thing. Basically, anytime I would express my opinions on something, but whenever I would disagree with my dad, he would take it as a sign of disrespect. That's like his favorite word is respect. And that's how he justifies all the abuse that he's put me through. When I would get hit as a child, when I would get yelled at, basically everything that he did to me or said to me, he justifies as I was disrespecting him and he had to discipline me. That's also where the autism comes in, because one time I watched Hocus Pocus, and at one point the little girl, I forget her name, said something that was a little bit teasing to her big brother, but in an affectionate way. She kind of used an insult in an affectionate way. I can't remember what she said exactly, and I watched it in French back then. But in my little, I don't know, 6-year-old, 8-year-old brain, autistic brain, I thought, oh, if I say this, then the person I say it to will have the same reaction that the character in the movie has, and it will be a way to connect with whoever I say it to. And I think I was trying to find a way to connect with my dad, because frankly, I think I was confused at the time. I didn't really know what he thought of me, because one day he would be loving and the other he would be extremely violent with me. So in my own little confused brain, I thought, if I say this thing to him that this character said in the movie, then it will make us closer. I said it, and my dad took it as such an act of rebellion and disrespect that he got physically violent with me. And those were the kinds of things that would happen. I would do something innocent and quote something from a movie and get hurt in return. Again, I think that was the compensation I was doing for my autism, the scripting, the copy pasting from movies, and it got me in trouble, and I had no idea why, because to me, it wasn't a question of context. If the character said it in the movie, then I could say it in real life and it would have the same effect, and I'm not saying that my dad's reaction was justified, but I don't think I would have done stuff like that had I not been autistic. And also because he's such a great, wonderful person, he also happens to be a very hateful person when it comes to minorities, and he is racist, he is misogynist, he is homophobic, the list goes on. So whenever he would say something hateful towards a person of color, or something sexist or something homophobic, I would argue with him, and it would end in a huge fight. Sometimes it would get physical, and so I would get to school every day crying, and my friends were concerned, but at no point did I think maybe I should bring it up to someone, like an adult. It never occurred to me. So I think the fact that it took meeting my partner and kind of spending less time with my parents to really realize, and also hearing from my partner's point of view as well, hearing him say, it's not normal what your parents are putting you through. Had I not been autistic, I think it wouldn't have taken me so long to realize that. And it took such a toll on me and my partner, because my parents abused my partner as well, and they tried to tear us apart. My partner would say shit about me to my partner, and then they would say shit about my partner to me, and they would legitimately say things like, my mom would come to me and be like, your father said that your partner is gonna end up bald and obese. They would come to me and say that. What? What the hell? And probably because they thought that I was as vain as them, and that appearances mattered so much to me that I would leave my partner if I thought that it was gonna get bald and obese. I don't know what went through their mind, but they would try to tear us apart. Once I had a meltdown in the car because my partner's work prevented him from visiting me on Valentine's Day, and we had been planning it for a long time. I was really looking forward to it. And so I had a meltdown, and my parents looked at me and went, he's gonna leave you if you continue behaving like this. Men don't want women behaving like this. Like, they would tell me the most horrible things. My mom would be like, I found one of your sanitary pads in the bin. Like, your partner could have seen it. Men don't like to see that kind of thing. He's gonna think badly of you. I was like, if you think that he cares about sanitary pads, then you don't know him at all. Like, and they would say these horrible things to me. And so I'm very happy that they're not in my life anymore. But it gets really tough when I have the Stockholm syndrome or the imposter syndrome kicking in that tells me, or the FOMO. It's a lot of FOMO. This little voice telling me, you should talk to your parents because you might regret it when they die. And I'm like, regret what? Not getting hurt further? Like, but it doesn't make any sense, but I still, and like I mentioned in one of my previous videos, getting my diagnosis, my autism diagnosis, has stirred a lot of this stuff back to the surface, because not only do I feel like I want to share my diagnosis with my parents, but also I'm pretty sure that my dad is autistic as well, and so I feel this urge to tell him, and at the same time I'm like, they're gonna use this against you, right? Like, they've found everything that they possibly can to blame the abuse on anyone but themselves. So of course they're gonna do the same thing with your diagnosis. Like, they're gonna say like, oh well, see, that's why we treated you the way that we did, because you're autistic. Or they will deny my diagnosis and be like, we're too perfect for you to have a to be autistic. Or they'll basically turn it in a way that hurts me and makes them feel better about themselves. So what's the point of saying it, sharing it with them? I know it's pointless. I know it's a bad idea. I couldn't stop myself from writing a draft of the email that I wanted to send to my dad. I haven't sent it, probably won't, but it's still at the back of my mind every single day, like nagging me, like, you should send it, your parents need to know, your dad needs to know that he's probably autistic. And I'm like, well, you know what, like, after all he's put me through, he doesn't deserve shit from me. I don't owe them anything. Like, I could have killed myself because of them. I came very close. They're the reason why I scored so high in the CAT-Q test. I'll make another video all about autism tests. I have, like, my CAT-Q scores are through the roof. I think I scored more than 140. They were so judgmental, they were so critical, they were so humiliating. Like, they would humiliate me so much and like make me feel like there was something wrong with me. Years before I found out I was autistic, I would describe my masking to my therapist and say, like, how come I don't feel like I can be myself around my parents? How come I feel like I'm wearing a mask? Like, I would actually say that. I would use these exact words. I would say, like, I feel like I'm wearing a mask when I'm with my parents. What the hell is going on? And they didn't really know what I was talking about. And so for a long time I attributed that to my childhood trauma. I thought I have trust issues. They hurt me so much that I don't feel safe being myself, and to some extent that's true. But then I thought, yeah, but why do I also mask around other people who haven't hurt me? Why do I mask around my in-laws? Why do I mask around my so-called best friend at the time? And so autism was a better answer to that question than PTSD. But basically, anytime I would be myself, I would be authentic, I would be just my autistic self, I would get backlash from it. My mom would tell me to stop acting so weird. They would, like, look down on some of my special interests or say that I was annoying because I was talking too much about them, and they really taught me to disregard my needs, which is, I think, another way in which my childhood trauma affected my autism, and vice versa, is that I realized that autistic people who come from supportive, caring, loving families don't struggle as much to recognize their own autistic needs and, like, for example, sensory stuff. I feel like I've completely lost touch with my sensory sensitivities because I just learned to suppress my needs so much that became completely oblivious to those things, and I have to learn to reconnect with those needs. And I know that comes from being in a family where my needs weren't important. My needs were seen as me being annoying, taking too much room, even though like there was only room for my parents, especially my mother. So it was definitely very, very tough. And also my sense of right and wrong was tested a lot with my father since he was so hateful. There were so many aspects of my autism that clashed with my abusive family, and it was not a good combo. Like, it's not good being abused whether or not you're autistic, but I think being autistic just adds a layer on top of that. Another way in which my autistic traits were suppressed by my parents is, for example, my stims. I would get stigmatized a lot for my stims. I've had a skin picking stim my whole life, and my dad would make me feel really bad about it. He would say things like, if you don't stop picking at your skin, it will never grow back. So then I wouldn't stop stimming because I couldn't, but I would, on top of the stress that I was already experiencing every single day, I would feel bad for trying to relieve that stress in the only way that I knew how. I remember suppressing my rocking back and forth because my mom would say things like, oh, children who rock back and forth look so stupid. And so I thought, if I do that, then my mom will think I'm stupid. So I mustn't do that. So I would repress a lot of my natural behaviors. And also, I have naturally a pretty flat affect. And my parents would make me feel bad for it. They would look at me and be like, you never look like, I don't know why I bother, because you never look happy, and you don't seem to be happy to be here, and like blah blah blah. Like, basically everything was wrong with my facial expressions or my tone. And so they would basically force me to mask 24/7 when I was with them, especially the older I got. And it was absolutely exhausting, and I was in such a heightened state of anxiety when I was around them. I would get physical manifestations of stress. Like, I would get like skin problems, like all the anxiety symptoms. It was really bad. They would also ignore any interests of mine that didn't align with theirs. So, for example, my dad approved of me being into horses because he is also into horses, but he disapproved of me being into fantasy stuff. And so when I spent 6 months working on a 40,000 word interactive story, a fantasy story that I put so much time into, I even went through the trouble of translating it into French because my parents don't speak English, just so they could play the game. And I showed it to them, and my dad was like, I'm not into it. I'm not a gamer. So he didn't even try it. My parents didn't care because my interest didn't align with theirs. Also, whenever I would have meltdowns, my parents obviously would call them tantrums, and my dad would give me cold showers to, quote, calm me down. And the rest of the time it would just be me in my room alone, trying my best to manage and process my own emotions. And obviously I didn't know how. I'd never been told or shown, guided on how to manage and process my own emotions. Had I not been abused as a child, I would have self-identified as autistic a lot sooner. because the PTSD, the childhood trauma, kind of obscured my autism for a while. And therapists just, as soon as they heard that I was abused, they were like, they would jump onto the PTSD train and ignore anything else. And so I think that contributed to slowing down my getting my diagnosis. But I hope some of you can relate to my experience. Of course, that it's very much condensed and like summarized. I'm not going to go into too much detail because there's just so much to talk about. That's my experience in a nutshell, growing up with undiagnosed autistic and NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, parents, as an undiagnosed autistic person myself. It was hell. It was hell. Like I was seriously suicidal as a teenager and had anxiety from a very young age. And yeah, it wasn't good. And thank God I had my special interests, because that was the only thing that kept me alive for many years. I have a Ko-fi account. I'll put a link down below in case you'd like to support my channel monetarily, because I do not work because of my disability, and I'm not yet eligible to receive any kind of help from the government. No pressure, no obligation of any kind. Thanks for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.